So I think we're going to get started. How's
Yeah,
that?
let's do it.
Let's do it. You ready, Kat?
I'm ready.
Okay. Well, again, my name is Monica Dillon. I'm a host here at Revel 11, and Revel 11 is really a community of inspired women, forward thinking, having real conversations about topics that matter and help change us and the world around us. And I can't think of anyone better than Kat Vellos to have a conversation about the art of connection. I want to tell you guys just a little bit about Kat before we get started. She is the author of We Should Get Together, The Secret to Cultivating Better Friendships, and also the creator of the Better Than Small Talk conversation cards. And I encourage you to check out both of those products, and we'll share a link for that. But also, so you know, since early 2000s, Kat has been designing and facilitating transformative programs for individuals and groups. She helps adults cultivate a greater sense of belonging in their personal lives, and also helps companies retain staff by supporting them to find belonging and connection at work. And you know what's so interesting to me about the niche that Kat has really found her superpower in is that, you know, we have more connection opportunities than ever, right? How
Mhm.
many apps and platforms and things, etc. But we're still struggling with this crisis of loneliness. So, Kat, let's start with you telling us just a little bit about, you know, how this came about from you and what you've been learning since you published your book and have started this journey of connection.
Yeah, thank you so much for the warm welcome. As I mentioned, it's great to be back with you in Revel 11 and to have this reflection point as well to say, you know, it's almost 2023 and what is going on with friendship? Where, you know, I wrote the book between 2015 and 2020, released it January 2020, and then we all went through this pandemic. And one of the things that I think I've learned a lot of things in the process. One is this one's kind of funny. It's kind of a joke, but it's definitely true. Is that if you want more friendship in your life, you should write a book about friendship because when you open up about that topic, so many people around you are going to open up about it. I think a lot of people walk around bottled up with their frustration or bottled up with their dissatisfaction around connection. And one of the biggest things I learned was that when I sort of got real with people and just like came out with it and was like, I'm working on a book about friendship, right? Or this is the focus of my work is around connection. Suddenly the people around me were just like, oh, I want to talk about that. Or can I tell you a story? Or like, even at parties or like dinners or whatever it was, like people are really hungry for the conversation. And so if there's anyone who's listening, who's thinking like, you know, maybe feeling like you would like more connection in your life or more community or to have some of these conversations, I want to affirm for you that it's generally welcome. I've never had anyone be like, I don't want to talk about that. It's like people are really hungry for the conversation. And if you have the courage to open up and mention it, you usually will have the folks around you responding in kind with their desire to talk about it, to engage around it, to even invite you to closer friendship or to invite you to be a part of their community. It's kind of, I had to do a post one time that was like about the practice that I've had to get into of like actually maintaining boundaries. Cause it's like, I'm an introvert. I don't need like 1,000 friends like every single day to interact with. And so I actually got kind of overwhelmed at a certain point. I was like, I had to learn how to like say no to too many requests. And so that is something I encourage you to do. And you don't have to obviously write a book about friendship. You can just say you read a book about friendship or that you've been reading articles about it or thinking about community, like anything like that opens the door if you're looking to build more connection in your life. And the readers of mine who also have had greater success forming connection in their life are the ones who are willing to come out about that and disclose it in some fashion, whether it's on their social media or by having a gathering or by doing a like neighborhood block party or whatever it is. When you create a space for that topic to take focus and for people to join you in that area of focus, things start to happen.
That's such a great learning and story from you. And I would like to share a personal story on how I
Yeah.
used your book as well. In that there was someone I had met in an online community who I found really interesting and I really enjoyed. And I wasn't sure like if we were friends or not. And your language in that book talks about just asking and saying, hey, what is our friendship about? Or how do you feel? And what does friendship look like for you? And so I said to her, hey, I read this great book. I would love to share my copy with you and have a conversation about it. And so I shared your book with her and
Yeah.
we had this conversation, and she's introverted too. And it really ended up being the genesis of a really amazing friendship. And so I really want to thank you for your book and for using that as an invitation for me to sometimes connect with people who maybe I haven't met in person, but feel a connection with. So, and I think a lot of us are sitting in those spaces, right, where we've met people in these online communities over the
Mhm.
last couple of years, and we say, what do we do with that? Do you have any other tips for creating friendship or conversations about friendship with somebody you've never met in person?
Yeah. Um, in fact, I'm really excited that you asked this question because I'm actually in the process of putting the finishing touches on a guide to creating like quote unquote real friendships with someone that you've just met online. Because like online is not real, but I think that we get the sense that it's like not all the way real until you interact in some other deeper fashion. So that will be coming out soon. If anyone wants to find out, get on my newsletter list. I'll tell you about it. Um, but yes, definitely acknowledging the fact that we have this opportunity to connect when we have these serendipitous moments of connecting online, whether it's at an event or a workshop or even just being a part of the same online community. Facebook is obviously a massive online community. And what we've seen in the pandemic is that there's a lot of really small niche communities that have started and that are popping up around like shared interest or the intentionality of having an intimate space with only like 100 or 200 people in it. And that sort of thing is really, really rich and juicy for finding people who are on the same wavelength as you, and that it's actually easier to then invite closer connection because you're starting from a place that's a little more focused, a little more intimate. And so having the courage to say like, hey, Monica, I really loved what you were posting last week about having a more handmade creative life. And that's something I've been thinking about as well. I would love to hear more about your thoughts on this. Do you want to have a phone call one day? And then when you build on something that you know the other person is already interested in, it's so much more natural than just being like, hi, will you be my friend? Like, I don't recommend people to just do that because it is a little awkward. And like, usually people are like, I don't even know you. Why would I want to be your friend? And so you need to actually start from a common ground or start from something that makes sense as like a mutual jumping off point than just like the conversational blank slate of like, I'm a human and you're a human. That's cool. But like, how do we know that we're compatible at all or that we're interested in the same things or that we have stuff to build on? So I'm really excited about this guide, y'all. I can't wait to share it.
Oh, that is such a great guide. And yeah, here I was going off the list of questions, and once again we connected on something. How about that?
Yeah.
I do think back to where we started around this epidemic of loneliness and this overwhelming pool of ways to connect. Um, People sometimes ask the question, why when I have so many connections or so many friends, do I still feel this sense of vacancy? How do
Mm.
you distinguish between surface level connections and meaningful connections and help someone assess the difference between the two?
Yes, this is real, especially at a time where so many people have dozens or hundreds or even thousands of online connections. If you add up all of your like social media platforms from LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever. And what I find is that we have too much breadth and not enough depth. So when we have many, many, many tenuous connections or like connections that are like, what even is this? Like, I'm a stranger on the internet, you're a stranger on the internet, or like, I followed you at some point, but I can't remember why. It, the meaning kind of gets diluted. And I think that when we're spread too thin, that's actually quite tiring Another thing that can get in the way of forming connection in, like, even if there's like a real hope or intention for it, is that fear of rejection is real. We're afraid of being open with someone and being told no or being shut down. And most of the time, we underestimate how open people are to us. In fact, there's a study that I really love that came out of Chicago where they had commuters. This was pre-COVID, but they had commuters who were taking the bus or taking the train. And in the study, they had one group of commuters. They had one group talk to nobody. They had one group strike up a conversation with a stranger just about small talk or the weather or whatever. And then they had another group try to have a meaningful exchange with someone on the train. And across the board, people assumed that if they strike up a conversation with a stranger, that the person would be irritated, they would be annoyed, they wouldn't be interested in talking, it would probably feel awkward and uncomfortable, they would not enjoy it. And of course, the opposite was actually the finding. People enjoyed it much, much more than they expected. It was way less awkward than they expected. It was easier than they expected. And the other person was more grateful than they expected them to be, which just goes to show that when we let go of that fear of rejection, let go of that fear of trying something new, usually the results are more pleasant and surprising than we expect. But another thing that I want to point out as well, when it comes to, especially at this, year 3 of doing so many things online, some folks are really just at a cognitive load. They're have Zoom fatigue, or they're really distracted by like having 1,000 tabs open and they're working all the time. And I think the fact that we have a very work-centric life here in the United States, laboring under capitalism, is like exhausting. And so sometimes people really do want to connect, but they just feel overwhelmed. And so if something feels like it's going to be work, they'll avoid it, even if they know that something pleasant or rewarding is on the other side of it. And so checking in with ourselves and saying, is my life delivering a sense of vitality to me, or is it draining me? And what needs to change so that I can actually feel more of a sense of vitality, and then share with people from that place can be really helpful.
Those are great insights, and both the fact that you have data and research that you're pulling from other resources, as well as your own experiences during this journey of your work, is really powerful. So understanding that people may be resistant because the stories they're telling themselves in their head, or because they're feeling exhausted, do
Yeah.
you have steps that you recommend to somebody who may be craving more connection, but just not even sure how to get started?
Yeah. So in the book, I have a number of different activities and assessments and tools that people can use for that. So, for example, one part of the book has to do about busyness, and like if you're feeling overly busy and overly overwhelmed, and there's different tools in there, like a time use assessment, um, and figuring out like where are you using your time and what are things that would actually feel more nourishing and supportive and joyful for you, and like where can you find the time, because even with really full lives, like you can probably find like 5 minutes a day to do something that's really fulfilling or connecting for you. And so, really looking at that, whether maybe it's like breaking up with an app on your phone that you discover you spend 30 to 45 minutes a day on. I've definitely had many people that I've interviewed tell me that, they go on TikTok because they have 5 minutes and they just want to be entertained or something. And then 2 hours go by and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm just melting into the couch scrolling on my phone. And they realize that's 2 hours they actually could have spent reaching out to a friend or practicing their hobby or whatever it is that actually is nourishing in a different way. And so I do think that we do have time, little pockets of time that we can find, and being honest with ourselves about that is important, as well as being honest with ourselves about the choices we make and how we use the minutes of our lives. One amazing book that I read this year that I really, really loved is called 4,000 Weeks. Tell me in the chat if anyone here has read it. It's by Oliver Berkman. And the title comes from the fact that if you live to be 80 years old, you will have approximately 4,000 weeks. Yay, Linda's here. It's such a great book. It's really, really the subtitle is Time Management for Mortals or something. And it really acknowledges the fact that you're not going to live forever. So what are you doing? Do you only have 2,000 weeks left if you're 40? Like, how do you want to spend the next 2,000 Mondays, or Wednesdays or whatever? And reflecting on that is, I think, quite motivating. I mean, some people think it's morbid to be like, I'm making a choice because I know I'm going to die one day. And it's like, well, you are, like we all are. And it's okay to be honest about that and to say, what would be the best way for me to use this hour or this next evening or whatever it might be. The title, Demi, is 4,000 Weeks. The subtitle is Time Management for Mortals, I think. And the author is Oliver Burkeman.
Oh, thank you for sharing that resource. And I think in a way that also ties back into your comment earlier that I wanted to expand on related to boundaries, because the opposite of maybe not feeling connected is sometimes feeling overly stimulated, right? Like
Yeah.
you've ventured out there, you have way too many connections, too many coffee appointments, too many conference calls, whatever that might be. And one of the tools I've had to learn to use is that every time I say yes to an hour with somebody, I'm saying no to an hour of something else. And so getting really clear about what it is that I'm saying no to that might also be a priority or a goal for me.
Yeah.
Help me understand how you've learned to gracefully manage saying no, setting boundaries, and understanding that unique balance between connection and space.
I love this question. Boundaries are really, really important. Sometimes people get afraid of using boundaries because it sounds like this is a harsh rule, this is a harsh line, it's scary. And it's like, no, boundaries are what allow you to be in relationship with another person without damaging, undermining, or abandoning yourself. Because you need to be in relationship with yourself too. And so not everybody is entitled to every single thing about you. Not everybody is entitled to use any of your free time just because it's free time. Not everybody is entitled to every grain of information about your life. If you get overly enmeshed like that, what you're looking at is codependency, not actually healthy autonomy as an adult. And so having boundaries around whether the time that you'll spend with them or how you want to be treated or what you're open to talking about or what your emotional needs are, all of that is really important because you need to obviously be a good friend to yourself and take care of yourself. So acknowledge like what are the things that you need to feel safe and healthy in that relationship and to be firm around enforcing the things that feel like, this is a boundary for me, or like, I'm not ready to share that with you yet, but maybe in time I will, and realizing they can shift or change, or you can say like, actually, no, this is one I want to keep. With that, be careful not to build too many walls around your heart. A lot of times boundaries protect you, but they can isolate you. And if you find yourself feeling really distant from people, not connecting with friends, like not having access to those really meaningful feelings of intimacy with like anybody in your life, maybe you have too many boundaries. Maybe you need to like ease it up a little bit and have the courage to like open up and let some folks in. So that's kind of my take on boundaries. It's an ongoing process, I think. Nadrata Tawwab has a great book on boundaries. I also really like, if that's a practice anybody here is going through, they're a good thing. They're a good thing.
I love that. Thank you, Kat. You have such great wisdom and suggestions, and I appreciate you sharing so generously with me and with our audience today. I want to make sure that I send out an invitation to the audience to put in chat questions they have. But in the meantime, while they're doing that, I'm going to ask you another question. And that is, sometimes we're in conversation with a friend or someone we know, and they share with us that they're having a health challenge. And I think in that situation, sometimes people don't know what to say, and they don't say anything, or they teeter with what the right response may be. And I understand every situation is unique, but if somebody shares sensitive news with you, do you have tips for that person in a way to respond or connect in a way that can be more meaningful?
Yeah, this is a real one. I've definitely been in similar situations to what you described, either on both sides of it, either having a friend who had gotten a health diagnosis or I had one. And so there's a couple of different ways to go about this so that you don't, just kind of feel frozen and like don't do anything. And I have a few things on this. So one is inviting the other person to tell you what would feel really good for them. So, for example, if they disclose they have a diagnosis, you say, do you want to talk about it or no? You know, and because maybe they do, maybe they're like, yes, actually, I really have a lot I want to process, or they're like, actually, no, I'm really tired of talking about it. I don't want to. But when you make it equally acceptable to choose either of those options and let them know that you're open, and like respecting of either option, that's really helpful. Um, Another thing you can do, particularly if you're departing from that person, when you're leaving, you can ask, like, would it be helpful with you if I check in with you around this, or would that be annoying? Do you want some space and time? Because sometimes what happens is everybody in their life is checking in with them all the time about that thing. And it can be overwhelming. I had a friend who had a cancer diagnosis, and everybody, all of their friends, all their family, all the time was like texting, asking questions, and it was just too much. And so having the space to say, like, actually, don't ask me about it. I will send updates via email periodically, and that is it. Gives them the space to not feel completely overwhelmed or completely identified by that diagnosis. But I think it's important to not totally ignore it or act like you didn't hear it. I was reading a book the other day where the author was describing working with a group of terminally ill patients in a hospital. And in one of their group sessions, someone in the group said that they were really frustrated because they were terminally ill, they were dying, and they had told their friends or loved ones that this was true. This is a thing that is unavoidable. It's going to happen. And nobody would acknowledge that they were dying. Nobody would acknowledge it at all, or didn't want to it's almost like they were afraid to acknowledge it was true because it might make it happen faster, or it might make it happen more. And they're just like, no, 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 I'm dying and I want to have as wonderful of days as possible until the end. They just wanted to enjoy themselves and have a good time. But it's almost like the people around them were so much more worried that they were inhibiting them from living the life that they had left. And so, yeah, check in with your people and find out, how much check-ins feels good to them, how much space actually feels good to them. Do they want to be engaged around that topic? Or actually is the best thing you can do as a friend to distract them from that topic and take them on adventures that have nothing to do with their diagnosis? And it's really going to be different for different people. There really isn't one answer for every single person. So have that conversation.
I really appreciate hearing that. And it seems so basic, right? To just ask them, to just check in, to just put language around it. Yet so often we don't when it comes to friendship and these delicate conversations. Why do you think that is?
I think we're afraid to say the wrong thing. I think that we're afraid to offend the other person, or we're afraid to make things awkward. And if it's something that we don't have a lot of experience with, we literally don't know what to say. I mean, Google is your friend. You can read a lot of really great blogs out there that written by people going through the thing that can tell you some perspective. But I think just the fear of doing it wrong, the fear of offending people, often keeps folks from not doing it. And the only way through that is to practice and to do a little research on your own on the internet. There's plenty of education, there's books, there's websites, just do a little research and then formulate a response that feels true and natural for you. Um, One experience that I had recently, or I would say within the last year, as many people did during COVID, is I had a friend who her father passed away. And I hadn't had a friend who had dealt with that, in the course of our friendship. And we checked in and talked about it quite a bit when it happened. And then some time went on and we had other conversations about other things. And after a while, I circled back and I said, hey, I know we haven't checked in about this a lot, but I want to acknowledge the grieving process is real. How are you feeling around, the loss of your dad? And she was so relieved. She was like, nobody has asked me. She's like, thank you for asking, because nobody brings it up anymore. And it was like a month later. It wasn't even that long. And it felt kind of invisibilizing that nobody checked in with her anymore about it or asked about it. And so, it was new for me, and I didn't know exactly how to say it right, but I did it in a way that felt natural and did it in a way that like I would want someone to do for me. So just practice, just self-education and practice and heart or or like the recipe, like stir it up and then like bake it and see what you get.
Oh, I agree. I love that. And if your heart is in the right intention, it's hard to be wrong, right? And even if you are wrong, then you learn and you get past it together, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
I'm sure that has happened, and I think it's probably more awkward to have it on your mind and to keep it inside
Yes.
you, right?
Hmm.
Okay, good. We have some questions coming through. So, Nicole asks, can you talk a little bit about a post you had around not pruning friends? Sometimes I'm not sure to do with friends I've had for a long time, but we don't have a lot in common anymore, and how to balance that with newer friends.
Great question. Thanks, Nicole, for asking. For folks who aren't familiar with the post, I'm going to drop a link to it in the chat. Um, this was a post just to give context to folks who are like, what are you talking about, pruning friends? So one of the things that has occurred as people have started to open up and get back together with whatever phase of the pandemic that we're in, um, it's awkward, or they get tired really easy, or they're like, oh, this is my life, my social life has shrunk and now things feel really weird and wobbly when I go out with friends or see people. So like maybe these aren't good friendships. Maybe I need to prune them away. Maybe I need to have less friends or not do it, cut them out of my life. And what I'm describing in the post is to say, like, slow your roll a little bit. Um, you probably don't need to cut this person out of your life completely forever. And instead of thinking about pruning, which is a term that's been used a lot in a lot of news media articles around friendship lately, the metaphor that I recommend in the post is resting a field, like crop rotation. So I'm a big gardener, I'm a plant nerd, I'm into all of this, I'm a master gardener. And so a lot of my metaphors are about nature because honestly, like that's the best teacher. And when you're growing a crop, like eventually the soil will become depleted. And so we do crop rotations to replenish the soil and make sure that each thing that you grow does a good job. And so instead of thinking about pruning your friends, thinking about like just resting that crop and moving your attention to another thing. Or if you don't have a lot of social energy, then instead think about focusing on a smaller group of friends that bring to your life what you need right now. Is the thing that you need right now to be with friends who encourage you to be your core, deepest self? Is it to be with friends who encourage your healing? Is it to be with friends who encourage your playful side and your creativity? Is it to be, think about what you need and who the people are that are like the fruits and the stems and the leaves and the flowers in your life, and who are the people that you can grow with in this time, in this season. It doesn't mean that the friends that you're not seeing in that time are pruned out of your life and in the compost bin and done forever. It just means like you'll circle back to them later. And if you need to take a purposeful break, I have some scripts at the bottom of the post to like that you can say to people if you're going to be absent and they're probably going to notice your absence, reduce their anxiety by clarifying for them why you're going away or in what ways you're going to be available and not available so that they know what's going on and they're not feeling like what's happening. But you also get the space that you need, which is again also a little bit of boundary practice, but it's also a communication practice, you know? And to Nicole's question of like, should I cut these friends out because we don't have as much in common? I don't know, Nicole, that's a decision for you to make. Um, I don't think it's necessary to like firmly, definitively like cut off a friend just because you want to give your attention to different friends for the time being. That's actually quite rare. Most friendships end through fading away or like fading down and then fading back up. And that's just a cycle of life. All of our friendships cannot be at 100% max all the time. It's just not possible. And so it's okay to say, like, hang out over here now. I'm going to like wander to this part of the forest for a little while. And then later you may actually find that you crave to return to them. And so when you leave that door open, you leave that possibility there as opposed to being like, I don't want to be friends anymore. And then like, it's actually the door's closed. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and those are great comparisons to nature, so relatable. And I love thinking about the ocean and ebb and flow. And so much of life is that ebb and flow and cycles. And it doesn't need to be always quantified as right or wrong. And it can exist in both places.
Yeah.
Along with that, similar theme, Desiree asked a great question, which is, do you ever feel disappointed in social settings when it feels like everyone is on their phones and social media and not really in the same place and not connecting with each other? We're all nodding. We can all relate to that. And tell us what you do in those settings, especially if you're not the formal host.
Oh, wow. Desiree, that's a thing. It's a thing. I'm happy to say I'm not in that setting very often, but one of the ways that I have prevented that setting from happening before, when I've been hosting a gathering, it's been to have a clear rule up front that I tell people, like, at this gathering, like, please, we're going to be off our phones and connecting face to face with folks. One thing I've also done is to make the room a phone-free zone and then create a phone booth on the floor with a square of tape. That's like, if you need to go on your phone, you need to step inside that square on the floor with like blue painter's tape around it. And the phone booth is like 1 foot by 1 foot. It's like quite a small space, like only one person can be in it at a time. And the person who's in it is like being watched by in the room. So there's this like positive social peer pressure to like not do that thing. If you are a guest and you're in that space, I think depending on your personality, you can decide what that looks like. So if you're a very bold person, you might say, hey, I noticed all of us are on our phones. How about I set a timer for 22 minutes and no one's allowed to go on their phone for 22 minutes. Who wants to join me? And you make it kind of a game that's with an invitation there. Or if you're not maybe feeling so bold and you want to do it a little bit more mellow, I would say try to connect then with a single other person, like pull them into conversation one-on-one. And that can be sufficient because, you know, in a lot of social settings, as I mentioned, I'm an introvert. I don't need to be like talking to every single person at a gathering. And having one really meaningful conversation with one person is often enough to make me feel like, I'm glad I went to that party. I can go home now. And so, you know, yourself, you know, your personality and your vibe, and what's going to feel doable and natural for you.
Oh, those are all great recommendations. I love the visual of the blue tape on the floor.
Oh, yeah.
That's really powerful and fun.
And then I like with a piece of paper next to it, it's like, this is the phone booth. If you need to go on your phone, you must stand here. Everyone's watching.
That's a great exercise to do with teenagers too. I'm going to have to remember
with teenagers.
Yes, it's perfect. And also you can just leave if an event isn't meeting your needs. There's no rule that you have to stay for the whole event.
Yeah, totally. If you get there and you're like, none of these people are my vibe, like I'm out of here.
We're so conditioned to be polite, right? And to sometimes put our needs in the back seat. And I love how you create this awareness around what are my needs and what lights me up and what nurtures me, and how do I honor that in a genuine way in the process. That's, to me, so much of what you stand for, and why it's easy for people to feel so connected to you in the language you use. These are great questions. Please keep them coming. And in the meantime, I'm going to go back to my list of questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have some new exciting stuff coming up, and I want to hear about it. Tell us about Better Than Small Talk and what's on the horizon.
So yeah, for anyone who's unfamiliar with Better Than Small Talk, it used to be a gathering I would host in person pre-COVID, with conversation starter cards that I would put all over the room, and it was an event, and a limited number of people could come, and we would have meaningful conversations at night, and no small talk is allowed. And so it's a tool now that anybody can use. You can download the cards from my website in the shop and use them in any setting of your life where you want to have better conversations. And it's a tool that can give you a lot of options for shaking the dust off of your conversations. Most of the time, people tell me that they want to have better conversations, but they don't know what to say. They don't know how to make it awkward. And when you create, with a little bit of structure and intention and creativity, a space that's like, we're going to do this thing now, then it invites everybody else to join you in that space, or for them to say, that's not for me. And so I've had folks use the cards in different ways. So for example, one of the women who spoke to me said that she was a high school teacher and was using the cards in her classroom as a way to start conversations with the teenagers. Another woman wrote to me and said that she was doing a family reunion, after not seeing a lot of folks through COVID. And so she was going to be using the cards at family reunion, like on the table settings and things like that. I've had, and also the Better Conversations calendar, which is a adjacent tool. It looks like this. So there's a month of options
Oh,
to
how fun. Show us that again. I want to see that.
alternatives to like different small talk questions. I have a limited number of calendars available for 2023. So if anybody wants those, hop over to the site and grab those. Folks are using these in the workplace. They're using them with their friends. They're using them on dates. People tell me they use it like romantically with their partner or on a date. There's really like any situation in your life where you actually want to have a better conversation is a place that you can find a way to like bring these in, even if it's just like writing down a couple of the questions you really like on your phone and taking it with you or taking a picture of it. Also going to work on some new tools that you can use in other ways, but that's coming. Really realize that when you ask a fresh question or an unexpected question, you're creating this door to a whole new conversation. It can invite a sense of playfulness. It can invite a sense of depth. Like there's really quite a range in the types of questions that are there. And anybody can do this. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be like a life coach. You don't have to be like, feel like a creative person. Just borrow these tools, just use them. And when you have more practice with it and have these things in your head, it becomes more natural and it becomes more familiar as a thing to do, because the rest of the time, our heads are full of other stuff. Our heads are full of our grocery list, our to-do list, all these action items from a meeting that we went to, and just all this other like fluff. And so if you take the time to drop in like little gems, then you want to pick up more gems as you go through your life and share them with other people. So these are shortcuts that you can use. And I have a discount code for anyone who came today. If you are here, I'm going to put in the chat. You can use the code REVEL, REVEL, to save 11% today until midnight.
Oh, thank you. And, for the audience, Kat donated her time to be here for us today. So for those of you who have enjoyed this and want to support her, I think that's an amazing way to do so. I am a huge fan of supporting our artists in monetary ways. And so I encourage you to check it out. And I mean, look at that list of how are you? You have so many, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but I want to not lose this momentum here on this, using the cards with the holidays around the corner.
Oh, yeah.
How many times have we gone to a Thanksgiving or a holiday dinner and it's like a snooze fest and people are just talking about the relatives or the weather or, stuff that really, and you leave and you're like, oh, I haven't seen my family forever and I just still feel empty after this.
Yeah.
Help us with craft around the holidays. Do you have special recommendations?
Yeah. So if you are going to be creating the gathering and hosting it, I would say just cut it off at the pass and how you frame your invitation. Like you can, whether you're doing it for like a formal gathering or a casual gathering, like go with the vibe that feels alive for you. And then the way that you craft the invitation is where you introduce the setting really for what it is. And Priya Parker has tons and tons of great resources around gathering. She wrote The Art of Gathering. And when you share in advance what the like rules of engagement are, you let them know what they're stepping into and they can choose to come or not come. So for example, if you're saying like, you don't want to have a bunch of small talk at your gathering about XYZ topics, you can say like, we're going to hit the pause button on conversations about these topics for the, 3 hours of this gathering. And instead, I invite you to explore like these other beautiful topics instead. And I will have many, many fun things for you to check in with when you get there. Surprise, like leave an element of surprise. But let them understand the reason why you have the rules you do. Like say why this is important to you. Like Monica, like if you're saying like, I want to leave feeling really fulfilled, or I want to leave feeling a lot closer to you. And these topics over here don't do that for me. So like, this is why I'm suggesting we do this other thing. they can join you in that purpose, or they can say like, I want that purpose. Like maybe I won't come to the gathering or whatever. But when you set up the framework, you set up that invitation in a really creative and caring way, it's not going to feel like a restriction, because what they'll see is they can expand in the direction of this like much more fulfilling experience that you designed for them. You know, when I was thinking about this, a metaphor that came to my mind as well is like when you're in the airport and you've gotten off the plane and you're trying to get out to the world, there's usually arrows pointing you in the direction of where to go. Sometimes they're painted on the floor, sometimes they're on the wall or on the ceiling, but like they just are gently guiding you in the direction you want to go. There's not signs that say like, don't do this, don't go that way. They just kind of gently guide you like into this way. So it doesn't even feel conscious. You're just like flowing in the proper direction. And when you do that with a well-designed gathering, it makes the better path obvious, it makes it irresistible, it makes it easy, and it kind of makes it unavoidable to go in that direction. And so you can do that with how you design that gathering as well. And if you are attending as a guest to a gathering you didn't host, there are things that you can do as a guest to subvert some of those norms and to be creative in the way that you show up as a person. So one idea that I like is to, if there are topics you do want to talk about, or don't want to talk about, you can even use one of those like name tag stickers to say like, ask me about like these 2 or 3 bullet points. And then even if like you're the only one who shows up with that, people are usually quite relieved to know like, oh, good, I know what to bring up with this person, or like, it's a topic I wasn't expecting. So like, maybe you got really into roller skating in the pandemic. So you're like, ask me about my roller skating videos or my, you know, marathon training or whatever it might be, because it's a thing they would never have otherwise known to ask you about. And I think that a lot of people are glad to take the bone. They're like, oh, good, I have a little thing I can latch onto in this conversation. I don't just have to be like, what's the weather like in Wisconsin? You know, it's like, oh, I just don't want to talk about those things. And I don't think most people do either. So yeah.
That's really great. And I love the guidepost and that positive frame, but I also love the intention of what you said about, you know, my desire is for all of us to leave today feeling fulfilled and connected. It's not, normally these are really boring. Like we don't want to start with that as the tagline. Don't start with something negative as the tagline. Start with something positive. Like, hey, you know, we don't get to see each other often. And it's my intention that we leave today feeling connected and fulfilled. Let's all share something that we're excited about right now, or whatever it might be. Again, you have a million different ideas for people to select language around some of the more, you know, kind of go-to questions that culturally we've adopted, like, how are you? What's new? What's your job? Where are you living? Right. And I think really challenging ourselves and even prepping ourselves with some of those alternatives before we go into that setting over the holidays is really valuable.
Yeah. And there's ways to do it that if you make it playful, or you make it warm and like this like hug or invitation, then people just like gravitate in that direction, you know, and it doesn't feel like rules. It just doesn't feel like restriction, you know. It feels like
Yeah.
enjoyable.
And Joanne asked a really great question I want to pop in here, which is, are there any tools to help steer a conversation from someone who just can't stop talking? We've all been
Your
there,
feet,
right?
and you can walk away. um yes, and it depends on the situation. In this, I'm reading the question, and it sounds like Joanne wants to keep talking to this person, but the other person doesn't let them in edgewise, as opposed to the other person won't stop talking and you don't want to talk to them anymore. If you don't want to talk to them, the tools are your feet. Thank you so much for that story about your mushroom collection. I need to leave now. But if you actually do want to jump into the conversation, one thing, one thing that I have tried and depending on the self-awareness of who you're dealing with, this might work. Sometimes it just doesn't, is to be like, is to actually pause and ask them, almost like asking for their consent for you to share and listen. So for example, like, oh yeah, that reminds me of a story about my mushroom collection. Can I tell you about it? And the can I tell you about it is a question. And if they say no, that would be really weird. So they're probably going to say yes. And if they say yes and opt into listening, they then need to do the listening part.
Oh, that is a great flip. I want to also capture a question that was posted a little earlier here from Eleanor. I'm not sure if you can see it in the chat.
I'm scrolling back. I see it.
9:36, and it said, reposting this comment. Would love to hear some thoughts supporting others in creating connection. Right now, I'm thinking about how we help create the conditions for others to connect, where we're not always the ones that are connecting in this group. In particular, I'm in a university setting and trying to support first-year students transitioning into this new space. Oh, that's such nice awareness. And also wanting to support all students in learning the skills of friendship.
And also experiencing the depth of deep connection during their time there. Would love to hear others' ideas and additional resources. So yes, absolutely. There's a lot of wisdom in the room here. There's a lot of great people here. Continue to share in the chat, folks, if you have responses for Eleanor's question. We're not always the ones that are connecting in the group, supporting others and creating connection. So one thing I'm thinking back to with this question, I spent 7 years doing youth work in the middle of my career. And this was a common experience of getting a whole bunch of young people together for an experience. They didn't know each other. And certainly forming community and friendship was part of the goal. And one of the ways that me and my co-facilitators did that, and maybe Eleanor is already doing this, hi Eleanor, but is to create a set of community agreements and to share those with each person who's a part of the program. It sounds like you might be meeting the students either one at a time or a small group at a time. It doesn't sound like it's a situation where they all meet each other at the same time, which is sort of the setting I was doing this in typically. But if you're doing it in a way where they're kind of like trickling in to the program at different times, but they know that everybody else who's in the group has agreed to the set of community agreements, then they understand that whenever they interact with someone else in that group, they share the same foundation. And the types of agreements that we had were to listen well, no put downs of self or others. That was a huge one. For people feeling safe and comfortable taking risk or stepping out. Be willing to try new things, which is a big one if you're stepping out, especially to make friends in a first-year university setting. And you can come up with other ones that really work for your program and your situation. So looking at the question, imagining a first-year university setting and trying to build friendship, maybe one of your community agreements is, greet other people with a friendly spirit when you see them, rather than just walk past them and ignore them and look the other direction. You leave off the second half of that, it's implied, but it's like, in this space, we greet each other. In this space, we don't let each other be invisible, or in this space, we acknowledge each other's presence, even if it's just like a nod and a wave. Think about the behaviors that you would envision creating the vibe of the community you're trying to make, and then base your community agreements on that. So work backwards from that, and then invite them to say, as part of this space, will you join us in agreeing to like these 3 or 4 or 5 things? Don't make like 20, make it small, make it easy enough to remember.
And Kat, I agree with you. I think what's important there is a few things. One is, if you're trying to change behaviors, pick one habit to change, get everybody comfortable with that before you stair step to the next. So I love that you focused on those examples on greeting, because so often, especially because we're in the phone culture, we're not greeting each other with eye contact. we're, walking through people like they're invisible, right? All of those things. And so if you create a gathering where you just create agreements, and I love that term,
Mhm.
on what greeting is going to be like. In this setting, we greet each other with eye contact. In this setting, we acknowledge people when they walk into a room. In this setting, we don't look at our phone when someone is talking to us, like whatever those, handful of agreements are. And I even like your idea incorporated here, again, stair stepping, maybe not on the first group event, but where you create the phone booth and say, if you need to use your phone while we're having this event, here's the phone booth section, right? And because so much of that, and I speak from the parent of a 20-year-old boy, um, and so much of that is just this tendency to hide their own anxiety about connecting behind the phone.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think that's such a great question, Eleanor. And I love that you're doing this work. And I think showing up and having these conversations and also downloading Kat's cards and scattering them through the room with a challenge, I think would be a fun exercise too.
Yeah. And I think that in a situation like that, where, I saw the follow-up comment in the chat where she said there's like thousands of students, across the college that are hoping to connect and they want belonging, but they don't know how to do it. That's real. And there's both a affirmation and an intimidation that can come with that, right? If the affirmation is like, wow, everybody else here, there's so many people, there's probably a lot of other people here who feel the same way. But the intimidation is like, oh my God, there's so many people here. How do I do this? How do I so many people, it's overwhelming. And so I think acknowledging that and speaking it into the room is like, you might be feeling overwhelmed and intimidated right now, or you might be feeling really excited. And there's a range of ways that people will feel in that kind of situation. And then making a really mini attainable goal, which is the goal for the next day or week or whatever, is to try to have one conversation with one other person who's here. You don't have to meet the other thousands of people here, but try to have one conversation a day or one conversation a week with somebody that you didn't already know.
I love that. I think we have time for one more question. And I see Christian asked, could you comment on the effective responsibility in starting a relationship exchange? Do you have thoughts on that?
Christian, I wonder if you'd be willing to unmute and give a little more context on this question or write into the chat.
And
Go
while
ahead. Sorry, Monica, go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe while she's doing that, if you have any other final thoughts that you want to impart on the audience before we exit today.
I can't believe how fast this time is.
It always goes so fast. You have such a wealth of knowledge, Kat. And again, thank you for sharing with us so generously and donating your time for the community at Revel 11 that joined us here today. I know we always get so much out of conversation with you. Okay, Christian responded, just starting conversation to create an agreement in exchange.
So starting a conversation to create an agreement.
Maybe it's more about, I think,
the community agreements of the thing we were just talking about, or an exchange.
Or even a friendship agreement. Like if the other person, or if in that relationship with a friendship, you're not accustomed to having agreements or putting language around it might feel awkward the first time you present it. So is there a way to get through that awkwardness of that first conversation about agreements?
Yeah. So good question. And I think especially if you're introducing the idea of, I'm going to do something for you, will you do something for me? There can be some feelings around that. Oh my gosh, are they going to be weirded out? How do I do this? I think one great place to start is to lead with where you're coming from. Because if you don't lead with where you're coming from, the person's going to be in their head for the first 3 minutes of whatever you're saying, being like, why are they asking me this? What's happening? Why are they doing this? So eliminate the why first, by telling them why it's important to you, why it's on your mind, what made this even come up in your mind? Why is this something you're thinking about right now? And why does it matter to you? And then say, with that context laid, how would you feel about, if we started to do XYZ in our friendship, you know, whatever the exchange thing that you're trying to set up. And then being open, certainly to any response. They can say yes, they can say no, they can negotiate for a different setup. But if you leave it as a like, how would you feel about this? And understanding that, like, would you want to shift it or change it? Or is this even something that you're open to? It creates less of a sense of pressure or expectation and more a sense of like, what can we build together and what would feel really good to the both of us? Understanding this is important to me. Tell me what is important to you, Monica or Christian. Tell me like what would feel really meaningful to you as an exchange or agreement in our friendship, and
Yeah.
then build it together rather than it be like, this is what I want. Do you want to do it? Which is
Ex-
another strategy, but like, I don't think that's what you're going for.
Well, and consistently you've shared the vein of reciprocation in
Yes.
communication, which is, I think, really important. I'm also going to just recommend that Kat's book or cards are a great gift for friends. I like to give Thanksgiving gifts to my friends and say, I'm thankful for you. And what better gift? Hold up your book again. I'm sorry, I've lent my copy out or I would have it in hand.
That's
We
what
should
it
get
looks
together.
like.
There it is. It's a great gift, and take advantage of the discount code that Kat has shared, and we'll share that again with the recording out to everyone who joined us today. Before we leave, I know Natalia will be putting up what's next on Revel 11, so I can share it with you, but Kat, you rock as always. It's amazing to see you, to feel your energy, to be graced by your wisdom and just overall awesomeness. You are dear to me. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. It's always such a treat to hang out with you and always lovely to connect with the Revel 11 community. So thanks everyone for being here. Thanks to like the friendly faces who popped up. Such a nice surprise to see some familiar names in the chat. And find me online. I put my links in the chat, weshouldgettogether.com, and reach out. All right. I will see you around.